Okay, welcome to all the speakers, participants, and panelists for this first in a series of webinars around climate change. Today, we're speaking about the use of climate change modeling, or specifically crop modeling for decision making. And it's part of a series of webinars where we're going to talk about the generation and use of evidence and how critical it is to mitigate some of the consequences of climate change. Today, we're having Ahmad Mohassel here and Eric Muchugu, and they will speak about a brief on crop modeling that American Institutes for Research produced. And it serves to really inform policy about how to make decisions in the light of climate change. Today we have various other speakers as well. We're actually going to start with Rob Alport. He is a project director with a focus on humanitarian settings and specifically on the Horn of Africa. And he's going to speak about the importance of crop modeling and climate change modeling for decision making, with a specific focus on Kenya, where our model focuses on. In addition to Eric Muchugu and Ahmad Mohassel, who are data scientists and senior data scientists at the American Institutes for Research, we also have Brittany Askapat-Jyoti, who will actually moderate the session. And they will have a presentation, after which we will be followed by a series of panelists. Not all the panelists have arrived yet at this point, but we will have Genta Conchi from the Green Climate Fund during the panel. We have Henry Tonang from the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology, and Philip Oudebert from the International Fund for Agricultural Development. We're very excited that all of you are here today, and we hope that you will enjoy the webinar, considering how important this topic is for now and for the future. I now want to give the floor to Rob Alport to start the webinar with some reflections on the importance of crop modeling for decision making.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I'm just going to talk to us briefly about what climate change modeling is and how it's used. But prior to getting into that, just a quick little bit about myself. As Thomas mentioned, I currently work with AIR, leading a project looking at food security analysis and third-party monitoring in the Horn of Africa. Prior to working on that, I worked for 10 years with FAO, very closely with the Kenyan government, looking at ways to improve agricultural development within Kenya. So a lot of what I'm going to refer to is going to refer back to that time working with the government. So just to delve quickly in, what are climate models? In their broadest sense, climate models are computer simulations of the Earth's climate system, which can be used to recreate past or predict future climate change. They form the building blocks of a plethora of different models that can predict anything from changes in global temperature to both immediate and long-term changes in agricultural production. So I'm going to focus briefly on the agricultural production side of climate modeling. And there are a number of key outputs of agricultural models. One of them looks at crop suitability, another yield prediction, and then there's a third component that looks at the nourishment of crops or disease situation of crops. I'm not really going to focus on that because that really focuses on, or that requires, aerial photography. So what we're going to look at is models that can utilize information that is widely available. Now, coming back to the situation in Kenya, populations are increasing. This is not specific to Kenya, it's widely evident across Africa. What that means is you've got an increased demand for food, but also an increased proportion of farmers farming on the margins, so areas that are barely suitable for crop production. Now, if we look at the capacity of crop models to predict or show us where crops can be grown and where certain varieties of crops can be grown, we can use those models to show within different counties within the country where specific varieties of maize will perform best, or where we shouldn't be growing maize at all, we should be growing some other form of crop, or where actually we shouldn't be growing crops at all and we should concentrate on livestock. If we're able to do that, we should be able to avoid the huge amount of carbon loss which is happening at the moment as virgin grassland is ploughed up or bushland is ploughed up. All of that carbon that's stored in the soil is lost, and then that soil doesn't produce any crops because those lands are not suitable. So crop suitability will really help us decide where to grow certain crops and which varieties to grow in those areas as well. Now, moving on from crop suitability to yield prediction. Coming back to Kenya, we have a huge agricultural deficit, which means we have to import a huge amount of primarily maize, which is the staple food in the country. If we change this to financial terms, in 2020, Kenya imported 7.5 billion shillings worth, or $68 million worth of maize. If we look back to the last severe drought, which was 2017, Kenya imported $332 million worth of maize. And they were really scrabbling around at the end of the season to try and get that maize in and ensure the country had sufficient food to feed its population. If they'd known in advance and had time to plan for that deficit, they could have purchased maize much earlier on, saved the country billions of shillings, and enabled people to have much more regular access to that food. And now, as we are coming into another severe drought, we had a very poor year last year, we've had an exceptionally poor year this year. We're looking at another season of very, very poor harvests. If Kenya was able to say now, right, at the end of this season, we are going to have a deficit of this amount of maize, they would be able to start buying that in now and potentially save the country billions of shillings or hundreds of millions of dollars. So really, that is the importance of crop modeling. I don't know how it's done. I'm going to hand you over to Ahmed Mahassel and Eric Mishugu, who are really going to take us through exactly how that is done. So Ahmed, over to you.
So today, my colleague Eric Mishugu and I are going to talk about climate change modeling for decision makers, and specifically crop modeling. Before jumping into the presentation, I'm gonna give you like a quick, a brief overview of a brief introduction of Eric and I. Eric Muchugu is a data scientist in Data Science and Advanced Analytics Group at AAR. He brings 25 years of experience and expertise in agriculture, livestock, biological sciences, GIS, and remote sensing. I'm a senior data scientist at AAR. My work is in the intersection of data science and international development. I worked on, within AAR, I worked on the DARPA World Modeler program, where we model different, the impact of weather and climate change on livelihood and food security in Horn of Africa. So next slide. So today, I'm gonna talk about, introduce the framework, the modeling framework we're gonna present to you, and then I'll hand it to Eric to talk about the rest of the agenda. He's going to give you like an overview of like agriculture in Africa, climate change. We're going to talk about specifically about the agriculture system and crop modeling. We're going to go over the data used in this model, the capabilities of this model, and at the end we conclude. Next slide, please. So, giving you like a overview of when we're talking about modeling, especially in this occasion, what we exactly mean, and you might have heard the word modeling, and it could have like different meanings. So when we're talking about modeling, some models are theory based, which means that they represented by an equation, drives the many of them drive from the physics-based model, for example, like hydrology model. You can like model like for example river discharge in an area by some equation. And there are some other models that we call like data-driven model, which means that the emphasis is not in like a theory behind the data, like we focus on like how data is going to tell us empirically, or like by building like a machine learning model. But there's another version that's like the hybrid model, which is like basically a combination of those two. Like we have a theory in the background, we build our model based on the theory, but we have available data, we feed data to the model, and by combining these two, we are able to build a model and gain a lot of information. So most of the models that we worked at AAR, and the specific example that we're going to talk about today, crop model, is in that category. So and I'm going to go over like the concept of like some concept that you might see here. So in each model might do like a couple of like functions. For example, you might see like you're saying like a model predict, for example, like predict maize production in an area, like meaning that like we have some sort of like variables together, like we put them together, build a model, and based on that, we say, okay, like this location, like the level of production based like X amount. But some models are like doing forecasting, which means that we are looking into future, like 3 months from now, 6 months from now. So like some of the models that we built have both capabilities that we would be able to do that. And another feature that some of our models have, most of our models have, is and this is something that's interesting to many policymakers and decision makers, is we run counterfactual or what if scenario. We want to know for example, what's the crop production level if rainfall is 50% of normal, like 50% of normal. So what's going to happen to crop? So having this in mind, next slide, please. So I'm gonna give you like 3 quick examples of different modeling that we've done, and like these are like 3 examples. We have like other models, and then like hand it to Eric to talk about crop model. So for example, when I'm talking about like predicting and under different scenario, so in crop model, one of the things we do, we're predicting crop production under different rainfall scenario. If it's low, high, we could either like quantify it by numbers, or we could make it like very like intuitive with like different levels, like low, high, no. An example of another model is displacement model, looking at forecasting the number of displaced people per population under different drought scenarios. And another model that has climate change and the weather feature is we can predict the agricultural commodity prices under different rainfall scenarios. So having this like overview of like the models, I'm gonna hand it to Eric Muchugu to specifically talk about crop model. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad. And thank you all participants that have attended our webinar. I'm going to talk about the crop modeling, and also in respect to also the climate change. And so climate change includes rises in the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration, the shift in air temperature, a change in duration, intensity, and seasonality of the rainfall, which has geospatial and temporal dependence, likely to negatively impact many agricultural productive regions. For Africa, we know it is one of the areas that might be affected. And we know certain regions that are affected within Africa. And we know most of the small-scale farmers in sub-Saharan Africa especially depend on rain-fed agriculture and their livelihood. And within this rain-fed cropland, only 5% is irrigated. So you can see how the situation is praying, especially for African agriculture. And according to UN report of 2021, there were 282 million people that were undernourished in 2021 in Africa due to drought, conflict, displacement, ecological degradation, and other factors. And hence, food import bill is continuing to rise. And if it continues in that trend without action, then the figures that the UN reported in 2021 will even increase, and probably even worse than undernourishment, probably even also the death of human beings. So, next. So the question is, how does the African farming system has to do? I don't think there's a choice, but it's to adopt climate change with either the adaptation to varieties that are good, and also the policies, because all the impacts, the climate change impacts, are stalling the progress toward food security. Whichever temperature scenario we look at, even if we look at the 1.5 degrees rise or the 3 degrees rise, the frequency of shocks that include the drought and the intensity of flooding will be expected to increase in Sahel region, Greater Horn of Africa, and even the Southern Africa, as depicted on the map that you are seeing that was produced by Thornton and his co-workers in 2006, which shows the percentage of failed seasons. That was the time, that was 2022 was the baseline, that the 2000 was the baseline for that work. And now you can see that as we head to climate change become more severe, then most of this region will have a lot of food insecurity. Let's look now the African setting of a food system. We know agriculture system is quite complex, and it is driven by the crops. It is driven by interaction of so many factors that are biotic and abiotic factors. And these factors, especially the abiotic, is non-living things like the weather or climate, soil properties, the crop management, like varieties that you are planting or the type of the crop that you are growing, while the biotic factors are things like pests, and diseases, weeds in the farms, and also the soil fauna. we know as the climate change increases, or take the frequencies or the impact in keep on occurring, we know also it affects like the pests, they become more numerous or multiply a lot, or diseases of crops. Also, some are driven by also the weather whenever it become either hot or even when it is too wet, some of the diseases. But on the soil fauna, probably most of the fauna in the soil, if they are degraded, it will become even less. So to understand that complex nature of agricultural system, we need to approach the whole thing by understanding how can we understand the system itself. Because all those interaction of a biotic and a biotic, we need a system that can comprehend, depending on the equation, like what Ahmad was talking about, be able to quantify these interactions. And one of the tools that is best suited for this and to help us understand, predict, and control and manage the agricultural system is through mathematical algorithms that quantify the knowledge about how the crop grows in interaction with its environment. So you can see there is the weather, the soil, because the system, we are not talking of growing things like the one in hydroponic. We are talking of the one of the natural system that most part of the world produces food. So it's all that interaction is computed and the system is built that we are calling the crop model that can help us to simulate the yield and also help us to understand the options that we may play with, whether it's the variety, like what even Rob Alport mentioned, like where is the best suited for certain varieties of crop or certain crops. So we know that the crop model, we have mentioned it requires the weather data. We have identified when doing this thing that we said we covered the whole Horn of Africa, the IGAD countries, the crop modeling. And we have identified where we get the actual data for daily parameters for the temperature, the rainfall, the solar radiation. And we use one of the source that is called EGERA 5. It's a data set that has been developed by European climate mid-range weather data that start from 1973 to near present. It's only about 7 days. If this is 27, you have to go back just about 7 days back. So that's why we are calling it near present. And we also include the rainfall from CHAPS, which some people may have known about it, developed by Santa Barbara group, a group within Santa Barbara. Then the soil parameters, because we need to understand the depth of soil, not just the surface. So you have to know about the soil surface information, the characteristic like the running curve of the soil. I mean, the water, what happened when the water come on the surface. and other parameters that now can go to the depth, what we call the soil profile. That data has been developed by some group, a number of people, and we use it. The other one is the management, and that's where now the farmers comes in, how they plant, the date, the season is, which season is planted, the date of planting, the depth of the seed has to be buried, the density, the spacing and all that. And that data come from the Minister of Agriculture recommendation, literature review. And then we have something else we call genetic coefficients. Genetic coefficients is how a variety is computed to be calibrated according to its genes and its environment. And that is something that is produced from field trials data and a few people who have published data about some of the crops they have generated the genetic coefficients. Then we have to know where does the maize grow, like in Kenya. And the data that we are interested for that is not aggregated like the way the government aggregated the data saying county. Kenya has 47 counties and aggregate according to those 47 counties. But we need to know where, according to this, the spatial, and we use data that is already disaggregated by people. Then we build that data and the software that we use are all coded, and we generate something called gridded crop modeling that is capable of running the whole country at once. The moment you click the button, is able to calculate the crop yield and other parameters like the leaf area index and many other outputs. So our crop model, after doing that, we have set the way Ahmad said that you can learn even what if scenarios. So we have set to run the crop model on what we call normal. Normal is the observed data that you have inputted, especially the weather. And when you are changing a scenario like the rainfall by saying plus or minus the normal, if it's below normal, is what we are calling a depressed rainfall. And we jump a number of factors like 50, 25, 75, like that. That is depressed rain from what is called the normal. And can be also very wet. You see the consequences of what might happen. So you end up having about 3 outputs. The normal, you can learn the depressed rain or very wet, where now you can see what might happen. And you are able to understand. So here we are showing the output of the crop model that has been learned in Kenya using a variety called hybrid 625. The hybrid 625 at least cover many of the regions that has been identified by CARI, or Kenya Agricultural Research Institute, that they define the country depending on how the seed should be targeted. And apart from the coastal region, what they call the coastal lowland, that's probably where it is not planted. But you can now when you run now the crop model, depending on the season, that is long range or short range, and you get the output. So the first picture is the normal, where you are not changing the 2020 information as it was observed. But you run the second one with a depressed rain of 50% of the same year, and you see the consequence, the output, the differences. And you start seeing the coastal region, that maize is probably almost zero, cannot probably produce much there. And again, when it comes to the eastern region of Ukabani region, Mount Kenya region, and part of Rift Valley, what we call the mid central Rift Valley, you start seeing also consequences of trying to run a depressed rain, how much you start to, the maize production will be lower. So we have run this one using what is also called management practice, that is high nitrogen and rain fed. And we have a number of management practices, as I said in the introduction of the data that you input. And for Kenya and for the region in the Greater Horn of Africa, or the IGAD region, we are running it at high nitrogen rain fed, low nitrogen rain fed, no nitrogen rain fed, and areas that are irrigated as another one, which is called the fourth one as high nitrogen irrigated. For the other pictures that I'm going to show you is now that low nitrogen, and you can see also the picture as depicted on the screen, the normal stew of that year, how much was predicted for that management practice. And also when you depress the rainfall, you run a depressed rainfall 50%, normal of that year, how much is produced. Again, you see it's still, but also there is some information that also starts showing that certain areas, even the fertilizer effect might not, especially when you run with the depressed rainfall scenario, might be not going to give you any benefits of running with a nitrogen, high or low. And the third management practice is that one, that is no nitrogen. There are certain regions, you can see that in red, yellowish color. Those are the main regions that some still farmers do not apply any nitrogen. And again, you can see when you run the same year without management practices, and when you depress, all the consequences of that. And it shows you there are still people, and we know Kenya farmers, not all of them use fertilizer. The fourth management practice of irrigation, we produce, but I did not put the slide because it doesn't make a lot of sense, because with the moment you irrigate, whether depressed rainfall or not, irrigation is assuming that your irrigation, you had the source of water, was not affected. So the output become almost the same. We also took we ran the simulation from 2010 all the way to 2022. And we compared with the information that has been reported about of maize production in Kenya by Minister of Agriculture / FAO. Because I put / FAO because sometimes ministry, you don't get a lot of information on their website. And when you go to FAO website of statistics, and you look, you get for each country in the world the output of crop production. And when you compare our model prediction, which is in red, and the Minister of Agriculture and the FAO in dark blue. And you can judge that the data that the crop model predicted is quite close to what the government predicted, reported. But you're also seeing a kind of a decline. And especially if you run the model even further before 2010, and you put a trend line, the trend line starts showing that Kenya maize production is slowly and sure is declining. And the demand of, according to the government data, the demand of maize is driven by population growth, as Robert Alport mentioned, that maize is the staple crop in Kenya for majority of the households. And this is going to change. Right now, it is the government uses the statistic that is 50 million bags. But we know in 2025, which is only two more years to go, that will hit 60 million bags. And we know now the trend of maize production is declining. The decline is caused by a number of factors. From literature review, it is land sizes. A lot of land has been subdivided to become very small, which has become uneconomical. Land degradation, the climate variability, especially the rainfall, and also use of inputs like fertilizer and seeds that are satisfied. There's a lot of people who are not. As we showed that people who also grow maize without any input of commercial fertilizer, as we saw in the output. So this raises an issue. What will happen for Kenya? Will it keep on buying, which Rob said, there's a lot of money that is being used. And even right now, there's a lot of hunger in Kenya, as our 2022 prediction of maize production, you can see, is slightly just below 2.5 million metric tons. And we don't know how much they'll have to import to meet this. We know they've been buying, the government has been buying within the regional, the countries around Kenya. And sometimes when it becomes severe, they import all the way from other countries far, like in US and I think Brazil. And this now raises a question. What will happen if this continues? If this one is repeated, like we know, in 2017, there was a bit of a drought, bit of 2014 again. And what is going to happen? And even, you know, there have been a small drought all the time. And now the 2 years, 2021 and 2022, and it's even predicted 2023, the drought will still continue. What is going to happen to the revenue that the Kenyan government collects to meet the demand of maize? That is also increasing. So what we can say that call it a take home is crop model can provide easy way of exploring the impact of different climate and weather scenarios on crop production. The policy makers can learn in season. And where I mean in season is like what we did for 2022. We know we ran it in September, and only the long rain had occurred. But the short rain, we know there's still people who are planting now. How much will that one produce? So in season is where you now use the forecast information and other information to help you fill in the whole year for you to run the crop model and be able to make or be able to see the results that are going to help you in planning. So as we saw in 2022, there will be also still not be a lot of maize produced. And that is an important information for government to know or people to know that they can now start planning before that happens. And from the maps themselves, even the county can get information out of them and be able to understand all the shortfall within the country, the sub-counties, the sub-county or the county themselves. Then what we do, or the government should do, is to shift from short-term policies of buying whenever a drought occurs towards long-term strategy investment that is key to meeting these challenges and opportunities that are there. Today, I read the Daily Nation, the IMF is telling a number of countries, I think Kenya being one of them, that they need to quickly start planning that statement I'm talking about. Stop short-term policies and make long-term strategies for investment in agriculture. Then that also throw a question: how do you develop those policies? The policies that we are saying long-term, that has a long-term strategy, should be policies that are developed with coherent economic-wide policies, so that there is no conflict, but they help to enable to develop an overall enabling environment that is conducive for multiple goals. Then the countries like Kenya should use innovative ideas at the heart of the designing the policies. What do we mean about this? The UN, especially the FAO section of FAO of UN, is calling for countries to try and adopt for resilience of agriculture using what they are calling climate change smart agriculture. Here also we say that also innovation like using the crop modeling will help, and will help to give what we said. The crop model is giving the understanding of the interaction of the crop growth and it within its environment, and also being to forecast what is going to happen. So all those type of innovation should be part of that of the policy design. And at the same time, we know certain countries that have gone to that direction, like Australia has developed a model that uses the crop model and develop something they call yield profit. European Union has also developed similarly a method that they use the crop modeling to also help them to understand what is happening during the season, how the crop are performing in different part of the European country members, different crops. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Eric and Ahmed, and then also Rob Alport, who started this session off. I want to open up for any questions on the presentation itself, and then we'll move into the panel, but I'll spend a little bit of time allowing our presenters the option of kind of answering any questions that are present right now about kind of crop modeling or what they presented here. So just a reminder, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and you can use that to submit questions directly to us, and we will answer them as we can. So with that, I will open up. There is one question here, Eric, this looks like it's for you, regarding the high yield of high nitrogen scenarios. So it says, it looks like the high yield areas are not strongly affected in the high nitrogen scenarios. Is there a mechanistic explanation we can derive from the model to explain that outcome?
Yeah, the crop model that we are running is capable to look the fertilizer itself, but the fertilizer itself is not the only factor. The crop model that we are using, and I'll give a little bit of the details, is a desert model that is well known across by many people who have used it in the world, and it uses what I explained about the weather, the soil parameters, and what it does first. The model has a number of components. It has what is called the water balance component, the nitrogen module, the phosphate module, and the other modules that are put together to be able to look at the crop growth and the yield that you are trying to look, or any other factors that you are trying to understand. This is what I said. In Western Kenya, the red part that is showing receives rainfall quite well. So really, it's not like the so-called the eastern or the coastal region and the eastern of Ukabani region and the central highlands. So right now, as we speak, most of the production of maize is in the Western Kenya. And that's why you are seeing having good rain characteristics. The production still shows, even when you decrease the rainfall of the same year you are trying to run the scenarios, you still get a bit of more production.
Great, thank you. The next question is regarding the variables themselves. It asks, what % of the variables are stochastic? How many simulation runs are done per scenario to obtain results with confidence? And what confidence level is accepted?
The data that I said we take is like the CHAPS rainfall data. It is data that has been developed using the satellite data combined with a rain station observation that has been. And that data is not, you don't get it near, although it is near, it's not near like the one I said of AG era 5. This data, they require the developer of the data to be able to get data from all the countries that are participating or where they are working to report about the measurement from our rain gauge. It's called data that is based on our satellite observation and the rain that has been measured. So I would say the data has been tested for many purposes, from even hydrological modeling to like what we are using it for the crop modeling. Likewise, we tested some of the things that we had seen from literature review of AG era 5 that is developed by European Weather Center. And we compared with what is called NASA agrometeorological data. And reason why we took AG era 5 is because resolution and also consistency when you compare it with the charts, because it has also rainfall and many other parameters than what we are extracting for the crop model. And when we compared, we chose to drop the rainfall from that, but also take the charts. That has a lot of organizations have accepted it as quite good.
Great, thanks so much. So I have one more question, but I'm going to actually hold it for a second. I have, before we get into the question on the Q&A board, and please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and we will continue to get to them. But in terms, you presented kind of here a sense, the kind of scenario that, you know, this understanding this climate, this crop modeling will allow us to kind of plan for a deficit in timing and plan our timing of, say, purchasing crops to account for kind of these crises. What do you see in terms of modeling when we're talking about climate change resulting in concurrent and back-to-back or overlapping crises? How does that affect climate modeling and crop modeling?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting question. And what I can say, still the crop modeling will give us insight that we are interested in. That's for sure. And we ran the crop model, and Rob Apport said he is in charge of a project that does thing in monitoring in the Horn of Africa. And what we do also in that project, we run every month, or at least every month, to see what is the crop modeling going to predict. So what I run every month is to help us to take the input, the observed information that we are not going to say it is projected. It is what has been received, and we know that it rained this much in this area. Then we still add the forecasted information and run. The moment we run like 3 times in that season, which we are saying a season may take only about 3 to 4 months or 5 months, we are getting more insight exactly what is going to happen. And likewise, we should run all the season, like Kenya, where we have what we call dual seasons. I mean 2 seasons. So you need to run all those seasons and be able to see what is happening. And as new data comes in, you keep on running. We are hoping to improve the long range forecast data that are predicted as what we call the tensile probability. That is 30 or 40 or no change from normal, a normal which we call, or scientists call over 30 years, that this is what is called normal. So if we input that information of the whole 3 months, we can predict and be able to know whether the season is going to keep on behaving the same like as it is in 2021, 2022, and 2023 that we are expecting. So we can learn all those, but we are working on that component to put long range prediction of weather. But the goal is run many simulation as you keep on getting data, and you'll be able to have much more insight. But at the same time, I would answer that question also by saying test as many varieties that the breeders have said are more resilient to some of these shocks of rain. I know like CIMMYT produced some seeds that they are calling drought tolerant. And they ran some scenarios across Africa. And they showed that it overcome the normal one that people plant from 5% more increase to even up to 40%, according to that literature reviewed report. So as you run this model where you have back-to-back drought impact, you need also to test as many varieties of maize or whatever crop you are running. Remember, the crop model that we have developed is capable of running not maize. When we developed for DAPA, we did 3 series: maize, sorghum, and millet. The reason is maize is planted in many countries in the region. Sorghum is quite popular in countries like South Sudan, and also millet. So we run all that, but we can run even other type of, not cereals alone. We can run even potatoes. But we know potato in the region, when we are running that those tests, is in very few countries where potato is a major crop. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that really does go back to this idea of kind of, like you said, you talked about drought tolerant kind of, varietals and climate smart agriculture practices. And I know that's becoming a larger topic kind of in the agriculture planning and programming world. There is a question here. It says, I've seen documentaries about restorative agriculture and ranching in sub-Saharan Africa. Is this something models could inform?
I can say I have read some literature review, or I have read some literature where it has been used in conservation farming, agriculture. I have seen also in where farmers are told to dig pits that are either 1 meter by 1 meter and going down about maybe 2 feet, put good manure, put good soil, and plant your crop inside those. Those will act like water harvesting, because you are not farming the other part. but you are drawing you are designing your farm to be those pits. It's a common method that is called SAI pits, ZAI, and is popular in those regions that are affected by drought. I have seen it in Kenya, in Taita region, Voi area, and I guess, and it's also popular for vegetable production in even in Sahel region.
Thank you.
So it can be used for a number of farming system that people develop.
Great. Well, with that, I think I want to thank Eric and Ahmed and just everyone who's been involved up to this point in this presentation. This was really interesting as it relates kind of to crop modeling. I'm going to open now up to the second part of this webinar. We'll kind of start discussion with experts outside of the crop modeling process to discuss climate modeling in their work and the future of programming. So again, I want to remind you that there is a Q&A available at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit questions you might have for our panelists, and we'll get to those as we can. So with that, I have the distinct honor to be joined by Dr. Henry Tonang, the Principal Scientist and Head of Data Management and Modeling and Geoinformation Unit at the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology, as well as Philip Audebert, the Technical Specialist of Environment and Climate for the International Fund for Agricultural Development. So to begin, I'm going to actually allow each of our panelists to just introduce themselves more thoroughly and mention kind of some thoughts on climate modeling and kind of thoughts you might have on the presentation, as well as what your organization is currently grappling with when it comes to climate change, food production, food security. So with that, I will pass it on to Dr. Tonang.
Thank you very much, Brittany, and thank you, colleague, for this. Can you hear me, please? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, colleague, for taking time to participate to this webinar. My name is Henry Tonang. I work at the International Center for Insect Physiology and Ecology. And basically what ICIPE does is ICIPE work within a 4-term paradigm: plant health, animal health, human health, and environmental health. And within plant health and environmental health is where we do a lot of climate change and crop modeling, especially yield loss. And in regard to which type of research we are currently conducting, looking into the impact of climate change on yield loss. 2 years ago, we were fortunate to win what I call the Grand Challenge by Gates Foundation. And with that Grand Challenge, we really bought one of the state-of-the-art equipment, whereby we plant maize and we are able to vary a number of concentration, like CO2 concentration, temperature concentration, in order to simulate future climate. As we do that, we infect the crop with a number of insects, and we have been recording very important data to see what are the key impact of climate change in crop loss. And as primary result, I think one of the key things we realized that insects, especially the stem borers, who are one of the main pests in southern part of Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, feed a lot of maize. When there's increase in CO2 concentration, they have the tendency of feeding more. And in our assumption or in our explanation, we believe that CO2 concentration, which is one of the key elements in greenhouse gas emission and consequence of global environmental change, when the plant is grow under high CO2 concentration, for example, it reduces the content of the plant in terms of nutriment. And now the pest, in order to meet this metabolism, it need to feed more. These are some of the very basic finding that we have realized. And one of our second aspect is we are now developing what we call the damage function, who it is the action of the pest to feed on the plant. And secondly, we develop another function that we call the loss function, which is actually the impact of the damage to the plant minus the reaction to the plant. And this is something that we believe has really been neglected in crop model. We do simulation, but we never account for the impact of pests and disease. And this is how we are trying to tackle some of this problem. And in our understanding, we are to do that and be able to map it spatially by linking the crop and the pest model and really measuring the losses due to the pests and be able to project it and see what is going to be the actual impact of climate change. I didn't talk to you a little bit about my background. My background, I'm a physicist. I did my first degree in physics and my second degree in physics, but I did my PhD in mathematics. And that's why it gave me this way mechanism to combine all the different biophysical process that happen from the photosynthesis to the loss to the plant grow and to that interaction that allow the pest to get its biomass from the plant and the different reaction that the plant causes in order to inhibit the impact of the pest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tanang. Philip, I'm going to pass it on to you to introduce yourself a little bit further. And same question, kind of, any thoughts you have on crop modeling and kind of, what are some of the questions that you have and IFAD has kind of regarding crop modeling, climate change, food security?
Thank you very much, Brittany, and thanks also for the nice presentation. So I am working, you've already introduced me, so I'm working for the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which is the specialized agency of the United Nations. And basically at IFAD, I'm working on the implementation of IFAD's environmental and climate framework with Paris alignment strategy on the one side, and a new biodiversity strategy. So that is very much linked to this topic. And maybe as a background, I have a background in economics, but have also worked for FAO for quite some time. And these linkages to FAO are also very important for IFAD when it comes to climate modeling. So IFAD per se, our mandate is a very specific mandate because we have the mandate is to eradicate poverty and hunger by investing in the rural poor. So we have a very specific mandate in that regard. And so we're working together with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, because we are basically providing the investment side while FAO is providing often technical support on these sides. For IFAD in particular, we do also very much use climate models. We also have an own tool called CARD, which basically measures or projects crop yields for the future using different emission scenarios. And in addition to that, we have very strong social, environment, and climate assessment procedures for every new project design that goes basically to our executive board. And that is very crucial because for IFAD itself, as our target population is the rural poor people, this is basically the population that is most affected by climate change. So when we talk about climate change, effects are very adverse, and they are mostly happening in areas that are more prone to weather phenomena. And this is the case for poor rural people. If we talk about the Sahel region, where IFAD is very much active, where we have a huge decrease in precipitation, and especially also variability of precipitation happening. We have increased high temperatures, and this obviously affects productivity of these households. And so it gets, for IFAD, gets more and more complicated to basically reach these populations in an adequate way, just because we have a growing number of people that are affected by these climate changes. And so crop modeling can provide a very good way to anticipate where we might have crop losses, where we might have problems in the future, and where we can counteract very quickly, be it through weather information services, etc., specific climate smart agricultural practices that can be adopted in our projects. So this is what we try to do, also scaling up our ambition in this regard with the environmental funds. So IFAD very much engages also with the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility to scale up good practices that can counter some of the bad effects that we see with climate change. So climate modeling, I would say, is quite an important topic for IFAD going forward. There is, and I want to get on to what Henry has just been saying. Within climate modeling, I think there's also some of the limitations that need to be addressed. And so Henry has talked about pests. I want to talk about something different, which we come across even more, and that is spatial resolution. As we have also seen in the presentation now, we have spatial resolution of the data sets is I think at a minimum something like 10 kilometers per grid. So it's quite a coarse resolution. And so going forward, this is a very crucial question for us to solve this problem of spatial resolution, as we want to target households. And with a 10-kilometer resolution, it is quite difficult to see how that can impact on a very specific farm in a very specific context. And I think one of some of the additional variables that could be taken into account in the future are, for example, the topography. So with a climate model where we are talking about 10-kilometer resolution, of course, that is not so relevant. But if we are getting into higher resolution, then it's quite important if you're on a more shady side, etc., because that will affect your crop yields. So these are questions that IFAD is asking itself every day, and we're trying to find innovative solutions and partnerships with other UN organizations, other international financial institutions, and thank you very much.
Thank you for that. No, I think both of you brought up some really good points in terms of kind of what are the challenges, and some of the challenges are mechanistic in terms of the modeling itself. Some of them are also in terms of the use and support and kind of for modeling in decision making. And I kind of want to break down first, kind of going through, the issues around kind of use and decision making. And I mean, Philip, you brought up a really great point in terms of usefulness regarding kind of the spatial resolution. What would be needed for policymakers or practitioners, like in your mind, what would be more useful in terms of bringing use to the table for policymakers for predictions that result from these climate models? And this is for both of you, so whoever wants to.
Henry, do you want to go first, like as you prefer?
You're muted, Henry.
You're muted.
Go first, please.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Henry. This is a good question, Brittany. We've thought about this quite a lot also before that webinar. I think there's quite a crucial difference for me to make between the decision makers. So that is mostly governments, but also more local governments, etc. But at least it is at a governmental level. And for us at IFAD, we have a very different dimension into it, and that is our beneficiaries at IFAD. So, of course, when we talk at a regional or at a country level, then what I was just talking about, the spatial resolution, is not as much of a problem, because we do want to see on more on a regional or country scale where some crops are more suitable in the future and where they're not. So what I was rather talking about is actually getting climate modeling to smallholder farmers, and that part is a lot more tricky because there we would need more higher spatial resolution. And there are additional difficulties, right? Because we will maybe talk about this later as well, but we need to also get the technology to the poor households in rural areas. And that means that we need to have some access to digital technology. And so that's quite crucial considerations to have in mind from IFAD perspective. But over to you, Henry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Philip. And thank you, colleague, one more time. In my view, I think having worked in many African countries, what I strongly believe, it is very useful for the smallholder farmer. It is seasonal forecast. It is something that really has been a little bit neglected. When we talk about climate change, we have this tendency, we the scientists, to look at the bigger picture, to develop big scenarios, to do models that we are not even accountable for, 2050, 2100. I even see some people already doing 2,200, 2,300. And I ask myself, do we really have accountability? And one of the crucial problems the smallholder farmer faces, they don't know exactly when to plant. And the most difficult is they are not able to know the spell of the rain. If it starts today, how long is going to rain, and what are the key variety, as Eric mentioned in his presentation? We have very tolerant variety. Let's just take the case of maize that has been developed for over 50 years by CIMMYT and other organizations. But the problem is people doesn't have access to this in order to adapt. Because I strongly believe what is needed, especially in this part of the world, it is about the better way to adapt. And my second thought regard to the whole climate change research and all is, I make this very crazy statement. Yes, the climate is changing. Is it changing to create a climate that has never existed before? Or the climate of this location will change to be the climate of that other location, or the climate of that other location? In other words, I believe the different type of climate that can exist under the sun that we use for our agricultural production are already in existence. It means we can easily characterize mechanism for adaptation in location specific from the area that it rains the most, like places around the equator, or area that it received the less rain, like the oasis in the northern part of Africa near the Sahara Desert. There are mechanisms with crops that has been proved to be very adapted to this type of climate extreme condition. And we also know that we can characterize different climate, develop different adaptation method, and as there's change, we gradually transfer this technology to people. This is another way, in my view, to remedy the forecast that we do. The forecasts are important, but as Eric himself said, the complexity that we have in using model always is not easy to address. There's a complexity in the crop himself, there's a complexity in the climate himself, and as we just mentioned, it's difficult. I've never seen any crop model that integrate everything that need to be integrated. There is always assumption that we make. That is why I've been thinking on personal basis, what can be the alternative? That's why I propose that we should emphasize a lot of seasonal forecast, and we also should try as much as possible to characterize the different area who have the extreme and be able to develop very nice adaptation strategy that can be put in a sort of a database. Organization like IFAD of FAO can say, if your climate change and become very worse, it's going to look like this. This is how you should be thinking and preparing your future to better adapt. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. I thought it was really interesting kind of what you talked about. You talked about two kind of larger issues. One is the scaling of information. And I think, Philip, you also kind of mentioned this in terms of getting this information down to we talk about decision makers as being kind of government agencies and funders and what I would call the higher level decision makers. And absolutely, there's a lot of power that is held in that, but so much decision is also made at the ground level. So being able to scale information down to the ground level, I think it's a really important point that you guys kind of brought up, both as kind of, the need to get information to them, but also to be responsive to what they're thinking about in terms of, like you said, Dr. Khan, the seasonality. They're not thinking 100 years from now. They're thinking, 6 months from now, what do they need to do? So with that in mind, what are kind of some of the challenges or opportunities around getting information to that level and decision-making at that level? Particularly thinking through, like you said, access to technology, issues of equity and inclusion, issues around kind of decision-making at the household level and at the community level. What are some of those issues that kind of you keep in mind as you're kind of talking about that?
Yes, I think one of the key issues, it is the digitalization of system, as Philip mentioned, because today we can use a lot of digital tools to really get as much as we can. We need to improve in our data collection. It is key because I strongly believe that today we talk about nano satellite. It's no more very costly like it used to be. And I think if there is easy transfer of technology and most of these area, each has a small nano satellite that can take the very necessary information with high level accuracy, I think it can really fast track some of the issues that are raised like seasonal forecasts, because seasonal forecasts do not need too much long time data. People need to know ahead what is going to happen. I believe that we need to improve in terms of technology transfer, in terms of having some basic equipment, but more importantly, in terms of translating the capacity building. Because one key thing I realize is we nurture people with certificate, degrees, but we also like real competence. There are a lot of people who cannot take the certificate they have and put it in the service of their community or in the service of the society. And I think we need to do more to help translate the capacity building that has been done into real actual competence, whereby you can use your knowledge and solve a practical problem of this our time, like this climate change things. That will be some of the thought that I have on this. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe to add on what Henry is just saying. So from an IFAD perspective, I think if we want to solve these issues, we have to think about building something like a digitalization roadmap where we involve all of the actors, and we do that in a participatory manner. And when I say all the actors, of course, this means the smallholder farmers, but then it means also we get on board different local governments, regional governments. We get on board other NGOs, etc. And that will be quite crucial because they will find basically the means on where we need to improve, where we have lacks on digitalization, where we can improve it, which areas need to be targeted as a priority as well. So participatory approaches are quite important in that. And I think what is also very crucial to mention is that a lot of the smallholder farmers are actually already adapting to climate change. So it's not as we are inventing something new here. People have always been adapting to the situations that they have in life. Of course, now with climate change, there is a very additional problem coming through decreased precipitation, increased high temperatures, etc. But people themselves want to adapt because they have an interest themselves in growing their crops. So using the technologies that are out there, a lot of these people actually already have access to mobile phones, etc. And why not using these information, the information that they can get through the mobile phones, and scaling up the capacity, bringing them, and Henny was mentioning this, bringing to them the seasonal forecasts. And this is not a very difficult thing to do. Some solutions could be that even just an SMS could be sent, or just a WhatsApp warning that there will be a drought coming, and this can be done at a monthly as a monthly prediction. So there are solutions out there, and we try at IFAD to also include them as much as we can in projects. And it depends very much on what the smallholder farmers then want to do, because what works in one situation may not work in another situation. We have to be aware of that. So there has to be some sort of acknowledgement, some sort of incorporation of these new approaches that we try to bring to the field. And so, yeah, that's just a few thoughts from practical experience from our projects at IFAD side. Over to you, Brittany.
Great, thank you so much. So we're running out of time. We've actually hit time, so I'm going to end with one question. I'm kind of combining two questions into one from Kim here. She mentions that farmers are adapting. You're absolutely right. But a lot of these adaptations address the short term, but not the long term needs. So to what extent, and this goes back to kind of that two-level decision making, do climate and crop models kind of integrate the likelihood of people adopting changes into practices, and at what level are funders willing to kind of back that type of, modeling, scenario planning as well in your kind of experience?
Philip, can you start, please?
All right, I'll try my best. So just on that point, on the long-term needs, I think this is a very good point, and that's where climate modeling is, in my view, absolutely crucial. And that's why I'm happy that you invited also IFAD to this webinar today. We've talked a little bit about the limitations, Henry and I, a little bit too much, maybe. We are very happy, and we're also very much investing in new solutions on climate modeling, and we do see it as a future because it can provide some of the longer term impacts that we can have with climate change, and so we can know what we can do in the longer run future. But I think what we just wanted to put the focus on, at least from an IFAD perspective, is that smallholder farmers have a more short-term perspective, and that is something which is really crucial here. Then on the climate models itself, when we talk about longer-term projections, this is of course very important. And this is also where we are investing in. I mean, IFAD projects have a lifespan between 4 to 8 years, and this is more of a mid to long-term perspective for a farmer, of course. So that's a very good point. I don't know if I missed the second part of your question, Brittany. Did you mind repeating that one?
Just kind of what is the kind of, the openness for funders? How are you feeling that the funders are on kind of the same page as this work? And it sounds like IFAD is, backing this type of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we just hope that going forward, Brittany, we have climate models which do get higher resolution, etc. It's not that climate models are bad. It's just that they are currently at a resolution where they are more at a it's a coarse resolution which can be used at some scale, but it cannot be used in every context. And so that is why we also have a look at it, and we'll always as an IFAD, as from an IFAD perspective, always try to invest into new initiatives on this, because we know that going forward, we will get higher resolution imagery. We will be able to bring it down to a smaller level. So very clearly, yes, on that one.
So then, Dr. Tang, I'm going to let you close out just with some final thoughts on kind of where we are on modeling and your thoughts.
Thank you very much once more again. I totally agree with what Philip has said. There is a two dimension, the short term and the long term. For smallholder farmer, many of them live on day to day, and they don't think about more than 6 months to come. I think in this context, short-term prediction, doing risk assessment, it is very good. And that is why I particularly like the presentation of Eric, because he was giving you short-term prediction. He was not going to many future scenarios. I think this is very, very good even for government to plan, because it is a matter of days here. If you buy the maize in case of Kenya, a week before the drought has reached a certain level, you will save a lot of life and you will put food on the table of many. But in terms of donor, in terms of the humankind himself, I think it is important to also invest in long-term prediction. I will say so because when I make the analysis I mentioned earlier, based on the phytotron, when I was able to empirically establish what I call my loss function and my damage function and project it, I realized that in future, there are some pests that are key issue in Africa today that may not be key issue tomorrow, and it may migrate towards the north. I think in this context, donors really need to be knowledgeable about this information. I think as the international community, people need to plan ahead. The temporal threshold of development in the next 30 to 50 years, it will be narrowed down within the tropic. Now, with the global warming, the bandwidth for their development will increase in the northern part of the world, like Europe, North America also. And that can create a lot of problem in terms of farming, etc., etc. I believe this can also be the same with other major crops. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. I want to thank both Philip and Henry for joining us here today. I want to thank Rob Alport, Ahmed Muhassel, and Eric Mshungu, who presented on crop modeling and generally how crop models can be used. Like was mentioned at the top by Thomas, this is one of a series, and we will continue to have discussions around climate change and climate change research, modeling, and kind of the evolving field as it happens. So keep your ears and eyes out for more on that. And thank you all who stayed with us as we kind of went over. But again, thank you to our two panelists today, Philip Audebert and Henry Tonang. We'll see you in a few months.